Hi guys, welcome back to my Steps to Sobriety, my show on YouTube and as a podcast with me, your host, Stefan Neff. Today, I've got the pleasure of being with Amy Watson. Amy and I share, like so many other people, share trauma in our background. And Amy is here to talk honestly with me about PTSD and about going through hard times, surviving, and then learning to live and love yourself and live with the passion that you deserve, regardless what your past is like. So Amy, thank you so much for coming onto my show. I'm really, really, really pleased.
Well, thank you for having me. I'm so excited. From halfway around the world, probably even more than halfway around the world.
Indeed, indeed. No, it's beautiful. Amy, we both met on a discussion forum for podcast interested people, and your story immediately sort of struck a chord with me. I think there's so many people out there who have gone through hard times, and I've had quite a number of guests who were so beautiful in sharing their story, their PTSD. And I think one of the things that we want to put straight out there is that PTSD can be an absolute bitch to live with. So you guys, the very first thing when you're listening or viewing this, there is help out there. But why? Because you're not alone. There are so many people who are going through very similar things that you're going through now. So please, the sheer fact that you're listening into this probably means that you had your fair share of trauma yourself and are living with the consequences. Do not give up under any circumstances, because there are people in your tribe out there. They're just waiting to connect. They're just waiting to tell you how they got their act together, how they dealt with the seemingly insurmountable challenges. So
True.
So therefore, guys, it is great that you're here, that you're listening in, and Amy and I will hopefully demystify PTSD and demystify things. Talk about the taboo, talk about the guilt and shame and all that crap that is going on in our heads, and altering, hopefully, a little bit the way you see your own journey.
Yes,
but Amy,
that's the goal.
Amy, you were certainly not growing up and thinking, wow, one day I'm going to go out there and teach people how to deal with PTSD. Probably not. Most kiddos don't have that on their wish list for Father Christmas.
Right. Yeah, no, never was on my wish list, that's for sure.
Are you happy to share a little bit about your story and
I am.
developed?
I'm very, very happy to do that. I am a survivor of childhood abuse. I am a survivor in every form of that childhood abuse that you could imagine. A lot of people like to get caught up in the gravity of my story because it is about 35 years of trauma. Childhood abuse, physical abuse, sexual abuse. Grew up in a children's home. Really did well in that children's home. I tell people all the time that it was the best 4 or 5 years of my life, which tells you a little bit about what it was like before. And really abandoned by my mom, who left to marry a man in our home who was hurting me, and basically the state of Florida took me from her, and I was placed in a children's home, and that was some happy times for me because I was loved maybe for the first time ever. I was 14 years old, did really well when I was in the children's home, went to college on a full ride scholarship, and promptly left, graduated from college, and got into a volatile relationship with one of the first guys that I had ever really dated. And fast forward 3 years and married him, and then lived through a 12-year marriage with him that was filled with violence, physical, especially emotional, and every other form of domestic violence that you can imagine. And so I haven't had many years under my belt. No, that was 13 years ago that I got out of that marriage, but I was 35 years old on the very first day when I remember not having an active trauma. And it was then and only then that I could begin to deal with it. I didn't even know what PTSD was, but I knew that I just wanted to beat it. And so I did well in school, and I'm an entrepreneur, and I started a business, and I did a lot of great things, all the while suffering in silence. And I think some of what we'll talk about today is how in those early days I coped with that in a very unhealthy way. This is a podcast about sobriety, and this is a podcast about substance abuse, and that is part of my story. And but a survivor of a lot of trauma and a lot of unresolved issues as well. And so then it feels so unfair in so many ways. And for those of your listeners, and I certainly will be making sure I share this on all my platforms, for all of our listeners who are asking that question, do I have PTSD? I always say, hey, if you're asking that question, then you got something, right? There's a reason why you're asking that question. And so it is silent, and it will kill us all. There is, as you mentioned, such great stigma to it. And so essentially 2020 did a number on all of us. And my business was, for the most part, shut down when the United States shut down. I'm a restaurant management recruiter, so restaurants weren't open. And I just knew that the time had come for me to use this access to this trauma and this pain and this recovery that I have to help other people. And so I went to I ordered a mic off of Amazon before the whole world did. You can't find one on Amazon now because everybody's a podcaster. But got a mic and climbed in my guest closet and started talking. And it has truly become my passion in the past 6 months to help people who don't understand what's going on inside of them, because I certainly didn't, and to help them know there is such hope and there is such healing. And like you said, you're not alone. And so I'm so grateful for this opportunity to speak with you on this today, for sure.
And it is so important to recognize that PTSD comes in many, many shapes and colors, and I call it a chameleon because it sometimes hides itself very effectively amongst other things. So you were saying that some of the things that you relied on were not so healthy, maybe some alcohol, maybe some prescription drugs, these kind of things. And it's very easy to then focus on, oh, I'm an addict, and our prescription drugs, and talk about nothing else than, see, you need to stop, and how dare you, and you're such a bad woman for abusing prescription drugs, things like that, not realizing what the cause of it is. Yeah. Why are you the way you are? Why are you wanting to stop the pain, not just the real pain from your injury, but the emotional pain for which you're really taking the prescription painkillers or the prescription drugs.
Yeah.
And that
it's so true. Yeah, it's so true, because then we began to focus, like you said, on, okay, well, you're taking medication instead of why. And so I spent a lot of years in that guilt and shame, and like, this is my last pill, this is the last time I'm going to do this. I just need to go to sleep. It's not that much. There's an old saying, and I know that you've probably heard it, and this is so true for me with the prescription pain pill. And like a lot of people, my abuse of that substance started with a car accident. Like I had a significant back injury, and it was in the middle of my domestic violence marriage. And I took that little pill, and I was like, whoa, you mean I don't always need to feel like everything inside of me is just ripping out of my chest and my head is racing? I don't always have to feel this way. Well, what changed? Oh, this pill. And it very much became that old saying, where one is too many and 10,000 are not enough. And so therein started my journey with self-medicating, never addressing the trauma, never addressing the monster that I was living with, always feeling guilt and shame over the handfuls of pills I was taking. And so I'm glad you said that, because I think for those of us on this side of that table, it's really important to look at people in our lives, and no one wants to drink themselves into oblivion. We're all chasing answers at the bottom of some bottle somehow. It's not there. That answer's not there.
Trust me, I checked every bottle that.
Yeah, me too. And I even put on my glasses sometimes and looked, and is it there?
I know. Just to make sure, there. Give me another bottle. Yeah,
when you mix the shame that's already there with PTSD, and particularly in my case, because so much of my trauma was sexual abuse in nature, and the shame that comes with that. It's a hot mess. It's a hot mess. And it wasn't until somebody stepped in for me. I was actually hospitalized, not from an overdose, but from a complete nervous breakdown, because I did have enough sense to not, at least I thought, take too much. I am very fortunate to be alive, because I know I took too much so many times. But it wasn't until somebody said, "You're not okay." And then just like this village just came around me and said, let's fix the real problem, because we don't even know how you wake up in the morning. There doesn't seem to be enough medication in the Western Hemisphere to deal with what you're dealing with. And so when that happened was the game changer for me. I went to one NA meeting and it completely freaked me out. And so, but the people in my life, my community, which is something I talk about a lot, said, this isn't who you are. You're not an addict. You're a PTSD patient. You're a trauma patient. You need help. And that was the game changer for me. So I'm so glad you identify the difference between those two, because the addiction is easier to fix. We can go to meetings and we can do what we need to do. Everybody has a different way, but it's all one day at a time. Sweet Jesus. Today I'm sober. Tomorrow I might not be. But that community that stayed, and then obviously getting into counseling to talk about PTSD and to understand PTSD. I was on medication at times, proper medication for the trauma. But that's so huge, and something that I'm not even sure I've ever actually even identified, that I spent so much time identifying myself as an addict instead of a PTSD patient.
It's sometimes, that's why I'm calling it a chameleon, because it hides so well. And my own PTSD did not become apparent to me until last year, literally.
Wow.
And it came pretty much from my teenager years. And I had reframed what had happened to me, the violence that happened to me. I had reframed that into something positive. So in my mind, my awareness around myself was good, was normal. That's what you should be. I was looking down on people who would go with their phone and walking along on the footpath, not being aware what's around them. And I get pissed off with people when they're driving and are dreaming along in their car. That's not me. Yet I didn't actually recognize how really probably hyper-vigilant I am, how maybe I was just a little bit too much. And that there were many other things. I mean, the 3 and 4 o'clock in the morning waking up, that's a bit of a giveaway that there is something not right. The crazy dreams.
That's a telltale sign.
Yeah, hang on. The crazy dreams where you wake up, what the heck was this all about? Yeah, once in 10 days or 10 nights, you get a shit night's sleep. That's normal, okay? Let's not be silly here. So if you wake up once with something going really weird in your dream, hey, if you do that virtually every night, exactly.
Something's wrong.
And here, I don't think I'm the most stupidest tool in the shed here, but hell, I was it took me really till last year to actually put the one and one together and say, shit, that is where some of my problems lay. And dealing with it then, with the help of mindfulness and self-hypnosis and stuff like that, suddenly things improved and these dreams were no longer such an issue. And the waking up at 3 o'clock, 4 o'clock in the morning, yeah, no, bye-bye to that. And thank you very much. I'm a
Wow.
better man for that. But it's a
Right.
chameleon. It's a chameleon. And guys, this is not a pissing contest. You don't have to be to say, oh, but my blood and gore was worse than your blood and gore.
Right.
No, there is it that you feel helpless in that moment, and that gets really, really close to you. Now, this could be because you were in a major road traffic accident.
Right.
30% of people in an MBA will have that, will have PTSD. Sexual abuse, the numbers are huge, and there is, of course, the shame there. But there are many other versions of events that then cause you to have the same end results. The hypervigilance, the completely on edge all the time,
Right.
the sleeplessness, the high levels of anxiety, really, your sympathetic nervous
Yeah.
system going nuts all the time. So
Yeah,
let's,
it's interesting because one really simple way to explain PTSD. I was asked this the other day, and my my counselor describes it like this: is PTSD, or excuse me, let's go back for a second. Trauma. What is trauma? Trauma is anything. It's clinically described as anything that takes us outside of our window of tolerance. Now, that window of tolerance is different for everybody. The same person can be in the same car accident and not have any problems. The same person can witness the same car accident and not have any problems. We don't know that, as very, very, very poorly understood why some of us experience post-traumatic stress disorder. And Forbes magazine had an article a couple weeks ago, and this is getting pretty popular, at least in North America, where they want to drop the D off of post-traumatic stress disorder because it's not a disorder. When we experience trauma and when we experience things outside of our window of tolerance, literal things happen in our brains. There's two things in our brains that are regulating these kinds of things, our amygdala and our hippocampus. And literally, when we experience trauma, we flip our lid like that. One of those glands literally flips open, dumps adrenaline, dumps cortisol. Both of those are stress hormones. And that's where the crappy night sleeps come in, the floodings, the flashbacks. Like for me, sometimes it's like, is this 1978 or is it 2020? I don't know, because I just woke up thinking that 1978 event was happening again. And so people try to self-diagnose, but like we just talked about, if there's something in here going, like you said, the anxiety, if somebody not moving at a red light immediately just makes you want to blow your lid, especially those nighttime things that you were talking about, the floodings and the memories and the anxiety and the hypervigilance, all hallmarks of post-traumatic stress disorder. And so people in the world need to spend less time wanting to label it and more time paying attention to what's going on inside of them.
And accepting that there is a lot of that happening. It is actually quite normal that your brain wants to make sense out of something really nasty that you witnessed or that you were part in. So these symptoms initially in the first 3 months after a road traffic accident are normal. I remember I was driving in Adelaide. I was driving on a bike, cycling from work, and a guy just didn't see me. And next thing I knew, I was on his bonnet, and he braked, and I shot off and was lying there like a turtle on my back, and my big backpack saved my bacon, basically. So I was lucky. Nothing broken, a little bit of a swelling there, a bruise essentially. And there I was, nothing much happening. So I should be all fine, shouldn't I? And as a doctor, how many accidents do I treat, for Christ's sake? And
Right.
here I was, the next 3 months were not pretty, okay? At nighttime, bing, you were awake. But that was normal. That was a bloody scary thing. And me as a doctor, I knew my chances. Had the car hit me in a bit of a different way, I wouldn't be walking, okay? So these kind of things so small accident, not even worthwhile mentioning, you could think. Big, big, big sequelae, big consequences for me
Yeah.
because my brain needed to deal with that. And
Right.
so for 6 weeks, 3 months, that's probably normal. So guys, don't beat yourself up if you get that. This is your brain trying to make sense. The
Right.
problem is, of course, if that doesn't then come to a conclusion, with that
Yeah.
then keeps going and going and going. And I think that's the difference between the post-traumatic stress and the post-traumatic stress disorder.
I would
With
agree.
the disorder is then
Yeah.
when it just doesn't want to go away, but it
Right.
is there actually for 6 months and longer. And it is what it is. And these kind of things they are there. We can't just push them
Right.
away. We can't push
Right.
away that the world is turning to custard. You have got a hurricane bearing down on you, and you have got bad winds there. Well, half of California is up in fire and flames, Oregon, all these kind
Yeah.
of things. This is massive, massive stuff. COVID, massive stuff. Having an idiot as president, massive stuff. Okay, there is so many reasons why you might feel on edge, or why you might be pushed so far out there that it actually becomes trauma, and that
Right.
you actually live now with the consequences of that.
It's
So,
so true, and there's there's such hope in understanding it. I think that the science of it is fascinating to me. My undergrad degree is in biology. I wanted to be a doctor when I grew up, but then when I began to see blood and stuff like that, but the blood didn't bother me. Sick people bothered me, and so. But anyway, I'm still very fascinated by the science of it. And one of the things that I want listeners to understand. Because for me, I was frustrated. Why can't you just get over it, Amy? Why can't you get over it? Literally, why can't you get over it? But then understanding neuroplasticity in our brains and the nerves that wire together, fire together, and how I had an MRI with 9 lesions on my brain, and then had EMDR for 6 months and came back, and 4 of them just disappeared because the neuroplasticity, the right side of my brain, and I always get them wrong. You're the doctor, you'll correct me, but the right side of my brain, which I believe is the emotional side, and the left is all the L's, the linear, the logic, all that. Those guys talk to each other, right? Well, trauma stops that, because when we go into fight or flight, and those hormones that I mentioned, cortisol and adrenaline, it actually seals in that memory. And it does that for a reason, like a gazelle in a savanna. It's if one time it got nipped by a cheetah, the next time it sees an opening and it sees a cheetah, it's going to run because it remembers that trauma. Well, that's good. And I want the listeners to know that those responses are good, because fight or flight is there for a reason. You want to fly. We want to stay alive in the face of danger. It's when that doesn't stop. And then when it almost and it gets stuck on this side of your brain, I call it the loop. It gets stuck on the illogical side of your brain, not the logical side. And so it doesn't matter how many times somebody tells you 2 + 2 is 4. If they aren't working, it's 3 or it's 5. And then you're hard on yourself, and then you take pills, or then you drink alcohol, because you can't figure out, you're so hard on yourself. Why isn't 2 + 2 equaling 4? It's always equaled 4. And then I had this bicycle accident, and now it's 6, because these guys aren't talking to each other. The 2 sides of the brain are not talking to each other. And long-term trauma, we see this in dementia and Alzheimer's patients too, when that is the essence of the science of the problem with PTSD. And so for a PTSD patient to not be hard on themselves is impossible, because that's logical, not being hard on yourself. They can't be logical when they're in trauma. That's at least been my experience.
So true. So true. Logic is something that you use in a cold light of a day, but you're not working on that level. You're working on
Right.
the reptilian brain level. You're working on fight or flight, which means that you make reactions to things that happen around you without even being conscious about them.
Right.
So you turn into a very different person than you want to be. And that in its own right is trauma, because
Yeah.
people who are suffering from that don't think for a moment, they don't know that they're not the nicest dad to be around with, or the nicest wife,
Or
loving and
friend.
caring, or
Yeah.
friend, etc. Any kind of
Yeah.
the social roles you can imagine. No, you are not fulfilling them, and that is then another reason for shame and guilt, and it just
Yeah.
builds on top of each other. And you, God, it can be a massive, massive, massive mess to untangle.
Yeah.
But guess what? We all have got that little bit of the ball of yarn, and there's a little bit thread there. Well, there is a huge ball, but start with that little thread. You've got some little clue, some little hint. Work with that, and
Yeah. And
unravel a
somebody
bit.
that, yeah, 100%. And again, if you're listening to this and you feel that inside, we all know it. I wish there were, the best way to explain this, if you're feeling this inside, is think of a negative emotion or what's going on inside of you as the color red. Let's call it a volcano. And so the volcano starts kind of from our gut and up through our solar plexus, and just kind of, it just, and then all this lava is coming down.
Mm.
And you're activated. Something has activated you. Something is, it's a trigger from a past trauma, or it might even be the trauma, or a trauma, a current trauma. What I do in the mindfulness, now I'm a Christian and my faith is really important to me, but you don't need to be a Christian to be able to do what I'm getting ready to explain to you. So when that red volcano goes off, so for me, it could be and usually all five senses for me with a trauma can do it. So if I smell something, see something, hear something, feel something, I always forget the fifth one, but all five traumas, all five senses. So the other day, literally, I had a little baby oil. I just poured some in my hand. We had gone to the beach and I was brushing up some shells, and it was a trigger, and it reminded me of one of my abuses. And I literally had this response where I just threw up, literally threw up. And so I was activated. And so that volcano was like, well, I have tools in my toolbox to help when that happens. And so what I know to do is, when I'm feeling activated, when something has triggered me, when it's red, that's why we picked that color red, and that volcano and the ashes are coming down, I know then that I want to introduce another color. Like, I envision in my mind this yellow bridge that I'm going to walk across. And this yellow bridge gives me the opportunity to shift my focus. And so, okay, that was then, this is now, I'm safe now, I don't need to be hyper vigilant. It also helps me to shift my breath, as I'm walking across this bridge. Well, I walk across this bridge to this beautiful blue body of water that is just nothing but refreshing. And I can breathe in that water, and it cools down all that lava, and it falls down, and even the lava ashes. And now things are being cultivated, and things are growing, and buildings are growing, and communities are growing, because I have a tool in my PTS trigger to go, that's not now. There's a reason. I don't need to feel guilty for feeling activated, for yelling at my friend, for canceling plans, which is a huge issue for me as a PTSD patient. Plans sound good in theory until it's time to do it. And then the anxiety comes in, and I've lost friendships. I've lost relationships before I could identify this in myself. And so now when something does absolutely trigger me, or trigger a PTSD memory, that's just something little that I try to do. And so, to use your example of that little thread, don't be afraid, guys, to pull it, because there are tools. Because when that thread is unwound, it is so beautiful, because it gives us opportunities to do things like we're doing now and help other people. There is just such hope. The stigma of it has got to go away. I don't know how it is in New Zealand, but in the United States, basically we just started recognizing PTSD in combat soldiers. We called it shell shock before. And make no mistake that 2020 will multiply by a factor of 10 the amount of post-traumatic stress disorder patients that we have in this world, not only in this country, but in this world. And like you said, living in the States at the moment is not particularly awesome at all. And so it's really important to take care of yourself. It's really important to listen to podcasts like this. It's really important to learn so that you have your own tools. That happens to be one for me. When I envision that cool blue water, but what's so cool about it is that action of stepping over that bridge, like, no, we're not doing this. We're not doing this again. You're not going to keep doing this to me. I'm walking over my yellow bridge to my blue water, which then just turns to green because yellow and blue make green, and green is growth and green is healing. And that's the visual and I wish I could claim that. My counselor taught me that. But it works. And so I think the main thing is, as you just keep saying to the listeners, we don't want to think, oh gosh, I saw a car accident. Do I have PTSD? Because it is very normal for those things to rattle you at the beginning. But if you find yourself in constant unrest, you'll know. You'll know. Whether it's anxiety or PTSD or anything else, you'll know. You got to listen to your body. I'm sure you're familiar with that book by the doctor's name that I can't pronounce called The Body Keeps the Score. And I have a ton of health problems as a result of PTSD because when we don't pay attention to it, it will pay attention to you.
Oh, yes. Because the cortisol and the adrenaline and all the other things that get activated, they do their own magic. And that magic is real magic because it lets you survive and you run away from a bear or so. But if you're constantly living with that magic when an email comes into your inbox, well, after a while, that stomach ulcer keeps growing. And those many, many, many other health sequences that derive from that. Yeah, that is
so
very true. No, you're right. Absolutely right. I liked the way that you phrased that a moment ago when you were talking essentially about the consequences, but also the need to recognize that not just in soldiers, but in many, many other people out there. But because it is far more studied and far more researched in soldiers, it's really good to see how the lessons that they have learned. I wrote a book, My Steps to Sobriety.
I bought it, actually.
Oh, thank you.
You're welcome.
So you were the one. Good. I wondered who that was.
That's funny.
In there is a chapter on PTSD amongst many other things. And in it, I tell about the experiences after the Falkland War. Falkland War was a very short war that was fought between Britain and Argentina in the 80s, and it was short, 5 weeks, but it was brutal, and many soldiers were killed on both sides. And the English had a field hospital, and the boss of the hospital, the doctor, wrote a book about it. In there is a magic chapter because he describes when the war was finished that the soldiers were sent back to the UK. Now, some of them traveled on the ships that had come down. So they were basically for weeks on those ships and had time to talk. Once they were on the ships, they had to turn up for roll call once a day to just show that they're still there. And the rest of the day, they could do whatever they wanted to do. If they wanted to lie in their bunk and cry their eyes out, that's cool. If they wanted to meet others and talk, that was cool and was encouraged. And that's what most people did. So there was that bunch of soldiers who actually debriefed, talked, expressed their frustrations, all their things. So there was that. And then there was another group of soldiers that flew home. So there were some airlines that were able to take them in. So that's cool. So you had people who were basically arrived back in the UK within 2 days, 48 hours, basically. Now, the incidence of a PTSD, dramatically different between those people who quickly got back and just got dumped, so to speak, versus those people who were within their tribe, within others who had experienced the same hell, and were now able to debrief, talk about it, make sense of it, etc. So it's that human connection. It's that making sense of trauma that is so powerful, and that is something that we have learned from that particular little nucleus story. But also, I've had other guests on my show. CQ, he is a gentleman in the United States Army, and he found himself on the receiving end of a machine gun. So he was not a happy bunny for the next many years. And it is beautiful to hear him talking about the self-isolation and keeping it all to himself and wallowing and stewing in those feelings versus then finally getting the help from the VA, from people who had been there, done that, had suffered the same way, and just said, hey, why don't you come along? Hey, we're doing whatever, golfing. Fancy learning how to golf? Okay. And he started being open. So he made a conscious decision to actually open himself up and said, what do you do? Golfing? I learn how to golf. What are you doing tomorrow? Oh, a course in comedy? Cool. I go along. Let's see how it goes. And what is he today? He's a comedian. So here you go.
Awesome.
From cocky inner city boy who is defined by his manliness and being the spearhead of the American army to cripple to comedian.
That's amazing. I talk about community a lot. It's so important. My healing began when I opened my mouth and told somebody. And we go back to the stigma of all of these things. And so during my domestic violence marriage, I just kept trying to outperform it. I'm a very successful entrepreneur, just have been very fortunate in that way. But for so long, I just performed in silence. And when I got into community, and they weren't people that are like, okay, Amy, you need to stop taking pain pills and you need to do this and you need to do that. They just did life with me. Hey, you want some coffee? You want to go for a walk on the beach? You want to do this? You want to do that? And it was like, and what they were doing for me is they were investing in me and they were building trust. And it was because of that. One person that just decided that she wanted to do life with me. We literally, I love the beach. I live in Florida. So in 60 minutes anywhere in Florida, you can be at the beach, which is the best part about this country or about this state. But we would go on walks and we wouldn't talk about any of this stuff unless I wanted to talk about it. Because that's the thing that a lot of listeners are going to be like, but if I reach out, they're going to want to talk about what's bothering me. No, find your people, find your community. I talk about the 3 C's all the time, but that is a huge one. But I am so fascinated by that study because something's really interesting to me about that is that they talked about it quickly after the trauma instead of, you know what I'm saying? Like literally they got on that boat and they had an opportunity to debrief each other or debrief with each other versus somebody like me who landed in counseling at 36 years old. And that was sometimes the first time that those words ever came out of my mouth. And do you believe that I actually asked my counselor, do you think I have PTSD? And he sat back in his chair. He tells a story, stunned, absolutely stunned. and so listeners out there, you're not the best judge of what's going on with you. So get people who love you, who will do life with you. I am very fortunate to have been able to afford counseling. Not everybody can. But your point is a good one. Get on the boat with people who have been through it with you.
Mm.
In my case, domestic violence, there's all kinds of organizations out there. There's a worldwide organization for any listeners out there. I have no dog in this fight. It just happens to be one that I really like. I support them in October, which in the States is Domestic Violence Awareness Month. It's called Break the Silence Against Domestic Violence. And they have a Facebook page, and just watching people flesh it out. And you too, you felt that too. How did you do that? And somebody's always behind you in their healing, and somebody's always in front of you in their healing. And some people are on the same place. I couldn't have said it better myself, and the importance of that, talking and finding people in your community. Because we all are going to come from different backgrounds and different faiths. My faith is huge in my healing. But the other thing that by far is people, my community, my tribe, who loved me back to life, quite frankly.
And it is those people who have been in the gutter, who have been through hell and kept going, that can be the lights in your darkness. That is those people that you need to find, that you need to listen to, that you don't need to say, I love the way you said it yourself. You don't need to talk, but you need to listen. You have got all the rights to get better. You have many times those things that happened to you, you had no control over. This was not your choice. There was nothing. However much your brain wants to somehow allocate guilt and blame to you. Of course it does, especially in sexual violence. There's always, and especially with children and young adults, you always think, oh, it's my fault. Somehow, in some weird way, it actually makes sense in your brain that you're to be blamed. And this is just one of these things with our brain. It can do some really screwed up things. So let's be very clear about that.
It's so weird because the very things that are meant to protect us, like we just talked about, especially the amygdala and the hippocampus, those things are put in our bodies by design to keep us alive. But they do work against us in these things because I don't know why we're always we think the worst of ourselves instead of maybe I'm this way because I need help. And that's very hard for people to do too, is ask for help. And I feel, and I can't speak to this, but I feel particularly my heart gets heavy for men who have PTSD, because not to stereotype, but women typically have friendships that are deeper in conversation bonds and stuff like that. And so for a guy to go to a guy and say, and at least in the States, it might be a very North American thing. But some men may not feel very manly and going and asking or talking to their buddy for help, or just saying, I need medicine, or I need counseling, or I need whatever. And so I would just encourage guys out there to keep core people around you, and particularly military PTSD, and be around your people, find your people. And it is the people like you and like me who have been in those gutters, who understand what it's like to take. I had a point where I took my drug of choice was started with hydrocodone, which is an opiate. It should not shock anybody, since we are America and we still are an epidemic of that. But I took a handful of pain pills, added some Xanax, washed it down with a bottle of wine, and was shocked when I woke up the next morning. But when I did wake up the next morning, I thought to myself, well, there's a reason for me to be on this planet. And so on this, my Saturday night, your Sunday morning is one of those reasons, because if just one of your listeners or somebody that you and I don't even know about either one of our podcasts can go, hey, here's two people from different walks of life. I mean, for God's sakes, we're from different continents. You know what I'm saying? And so different walks of life, different trauma. You're earlier in your PTSD journey than I am. I got my diagnosis about 12, 13 years ago. And and so we're all, and here's something else that's so important, not to compare our trauma. Because people will hear a story like mine and they'll be like, well, I wasn't babysat by serial killers like she was. My mom just beat the crap out of me, or my dad did this, or I wasn't abused like she was, or I didn't have the trauma that Stefan had. I didn't have, I got a paper cut compared to them. You can't do that because your brain is not our brains, and your brain is going to respond like your brain should respond. And so I'm always so nervous about people comparing pain, because sometimes this trauma, the body of trauma, can be so heavy on one person, and then it'll make another person go, well, I don't have that, so I should be grateful. No, you're a human being too, and you've been hurt too, and you deserve to be well, just like you just said.
Exactly. And it's if you look at the Me Too movement, and if you look at women, especially with sexual violence, discussing the trauma, you will find that there are women who have suffered a true rape with all its awful consequences. And there are other women that are just as traumatized by a person in power next to them putting his hand on their buttocks.
Yep.
So you would say, oh, come on, get over it, girl. Yet that girl is traumatized for years to come because she feels helpless. It was for her, it was a trauma. So you cannot compare. You cannot compare. I think that's a key message.
Because everybody's window of tolerance is different too, right? And so, and anytime, especially in sexual trauma, even improperly speaking to another person, whether it be male or female, by way of being inappropriate and saying horrible things, and you know what I'm saying? Even that can be traumatic, because what that does for women in general, I can't speak for men, but what it does for women is it was like, this is all, my body is all that I have. And you putting your hand on my buttocks is out of bounds. And that is probably trauma for 99% of women, but they don't know it because they're like, well, he didn't rape me. He didn't take me up to his room. But it's so important. If it's trauma for you, it's trauma. And there's big T trauma and little t trauma, but it's all trauma, you know, so and true. It does the same thing to our brains.
So true. If you could go back in time and give your previous self some advice, what would that advice be?
Wow. That's a great question. It really is a great question. It would be the same advice that I'm giving to myself today. Like, I'm setting up for this and it needed to be perfect, you know, and at the 7-year-old little girl where the first trauma happened, I would like to say to her, as I would say it to a 7-year-old that was sitting beside me, sweetie, you're so loved and so cherished, and so just that this was wrong. This is not your fault. If I could go back, I would have paid attention to everything that was going on inside of me. And I would have stopped trying to anesthetize it with performance, accolades, college degrees, and drugs. I would be kind to myself. I would say, dude, you are a warrior, and it's okay. You're okay. Rest. You know, there are days at 3:00 in the afternoon, I need to rest. It's okay to say no to friends. No, I can't come to that party with 3,000 people because I just can't. And so if I had advice to give to myself, it would be to be kind to myself, take care of myself, and understand that I don't know anything about how to help myself, because taking those pills, I thought, well, this at least helps me sleep. That helps me, you know. So I would pay attention to what was going on inside of me when I was old enough to do something about it. so about college age, I would have paid attention and went, wait a second, this isn't okay. And I would have done something about it then. Instead, it took a complete nervous breakdown for me to get help.
Welcome to my world. Because virtually every guest in this show is like you, because that's human. That is, it is this kind of.
Good. That's good to hear that it's human, because sometimes you think, I just.
No.
You know.
Everyone I talk to, essentially, there are very few guests who say, well, I was on the slippery slope, but I caught myself in time. Nah, that doesn't seem to happen with humans. Most of us, we just keep sliding. And then until we come into free fall, and then we come to the rock bottom, and then we wake up and we start looking at what is really going on. And guess what? It all typically finding a way out of your misery typically begins with admitting that you're in misery to start off with, actually recognizing that you have got a problem. And for many of us, that means actually stopping the hiding, and stopping the mask, putting so much makeup on that it looks like painting by numbers.
Yes.
So no, stop the mask. Actually, let's have a look what is underneath that mask, and then the healing
can't outwit
can begin.
this.
Yeah,
you know what I'm saying. You can't outwit this. You got to address it. It's not going away. Exactly. It will. If you don't pay attention to it, it will pay attention to you. And so. My heart's desire, and I don't know what's going to happen with my business. I mean, I was working 60 to 75 hours a week doing that business, and then enter COVID and enter this, and I'm spending days and nights. I'm writing, I'm guesting. I have my own podcast because I know there are people out there like me, and unfortunately, there are people out there like me who are self-medicating, particularly with opiates. Now, alcohol was never really my thing. Just didn't do it for me, but pain pills and benzos and stuff like that bring it all down and make life happy. People are dying because of that. Because again, you got a part of your brain, the logical part of your brain is not firing properly. There's not, and I'm being sciencey, not because I'm talking to a doctor, but because I love this stuff. But, you've lost neuroplasticity with trauma. The longer you don't address trauma, the more damage is done. And your two sides of your brain, which we are made with, and we need both of them, will stop working. And so it's just my passion that people hear this message. It's just my passion. There's hope, there's help out there. And I am a living proof example that now life still isn't great. I still day by day, I had broke my arm a year ago. And the first thing I said to my friends was, I don't want to go to the ER. I mean, my arm is it was broken. And they were like, why don't you want to go to the ER? And I was like, because they're going to give me pain medication. And I can't do that again, because I knew that first shot of it was going to be an issue. And so we got there, and of course they ended up having to give me a shot of morphine, but they said, do you want a prescription I was not even at home. I was in Texas. And I said, no, absolutely. No, I do not. Because I understood that one is too many and 10,000 is not enough. And unless the story drastically changes, I will always have to pay attention to this little Amy inside jumping up and down going, pay attention to the trauma. Pay attention to the trauma. I don't live in it. I don't bask in it. I've turned it around to the things like this. I'm writing a book. Been writing it for 10 years, but I'm writing a book. And I keep telling people the manuscript had to heal too. It's you gotta, and so to that point, we both are easy to find on social media. One of my favorite podcasters is Annie F. Downs, and I love a thing that she says at the end of all of her podcasts. I'm embarrassingly easy to find. on social media. Right before I got on with you, had a message from a young lady with PTSD that listened to one of my podcasts and was asking me about EMDR. And so I am thriving off of that. And
nice.
It is healing me into those blue waters and that green, which is growth. And so all of my trauma from that volcano, all this stuff is just growing, and beauty from ashes. And so people out there listening, guys, the likelihood, especially if you're living in North America or Europe, that the pandemic alone, whether it's actually that you lost somebody from COVID or the economic impacts or just the self-isolation. I live by myself. Fortunately, I have a neighbor that I bubbled with us. But we are, our CDC said here that we wouldn't see a slowdown of this until to the end of 2021. It has been so traumatic for every person on this planet. And so everyone under the sound of both of our voices, please hear us when we say you do not have to live in the misery. You don't have to deny it. If you're getting mad at red lights, if you're scared, I mean, gosh, we could go on and on at, active shootings, and maybe you guys had that horrible one in New Zealand, and it kind of is everyday news here. But for those of us that are PTSD patients, that kind of stuff just pokes what's already there. You think of that Maslow's hierarchy of needs, with the lowest being, I just need food and shelter. But then the one above that is I need to feel safe. Lots of PTSD patients don't feel safe. Exactly. And so whatever your treatment is, whatever your way to handle it is, read your book, find books, listen to podcasts. If you can, go to counseling, but don't ignore it. Don't ignore it.
So true. Hey, give us do you have a name of your book already?
Yes, the name of my book is going to be The Miracle of Me. Yes. And so it is a miracle that you and I are sitting here talking. Not for lack of trying. I should not be here, whether it be by the decisions of somebody else's or by the copious amounts of opiates that I have put in my body. And so I tell the story of how we got from there to here. And while many people may not share my faith, the one thing that we all share is each other, and community is everything in this. Counseling, if you can afford it, is everything in this. And so, so I'm about 75% of the way in. I'm having a hard time writing the first third of it. The first third I'm struggling with. But man, such a heart. And so for those of you out there listening, reach out to one of us. And we're all, like I said, we're easy to find. And I, to the best of my ability, as much as I can keep up, I respond personally to everyone that messages me. And because that's what I'm going to do. And meanwhile, somebody else is running my business. And so this is going to be what I'm going to do for a while. I thought my first season of my podcast would be just on PTSD and I'd call it a day, but that's not, you know how you just feel like I was born for this.
I feel the same. I feel the same.
Yeah. That's where I am.
If you would have told me 3/4 of a year ago that one day I would consider myself an influencer or whatever label you want to put on it, I would have thought, come on, you have got a little screw loose there. But no, it is once you actually start meeting beautiful people from around the world and explore the reason why people drink, why people use, why the trauma that is sitting behind it all, and find ways out of these miseries. This is such a revelation. This is such a beautiful feeling that I can't see myself stopping that anytime soon, because every new person I touch and I get to know leaves an imprint on me, leaves lessons that they've learned on me. I grow with every interview. As It's a beautiful, beautiful, beautiful journey. So you
It
guys,
really is a cool journey.
isn't it? Exactly. So hang around, subscribe to our channels, subscribe
Yeah,
to
that's
us
right.
on Instagram and Facebook, and just be part of our tribe, of the tribe of people who have gone through hell and kept going and are now making this world a little bit of a better place, one interview at a time. Hey?
Yeah, 100%. And one thing that I would just close with is remember that shame wants to tell you that you are your mistake, not that you made a mistake. And
Very
so
nice.
for those of you out there still struggling with sobriety, still struggling with falling off the wagon, and that might be me tomorrow, remember that there's no shame, and you are not shame. You're not your mistakes. You're not your trauma. You're not your past. And because shame will absolutely just make it dark. And so yeah, the mission is clear. You can find me on all the socials, first name, last name, amywatsonauthor.com. And I'm on all Facebook and Twitter and Instagram. I'm on with Amy Watson Author being the handles, except for Instagram is author Amy Watson. But please reach out to one of us. There's hope in this, and you're looking at two of those people right now. So I thank you so much for this opportunity. It is my passion, and I've been looking forward to it all day.
Oh, no, and the same with me. Thank you so much for coming onto my show, Amy. And you guys out there, look after yourself and be bold. Recognize that something is not right. Otherwise, you wouldn't be listening to this
Right.
podcast or view this YouTube video. Go out there, find the help that helps you to move forward and to live the life that you want to live.
Yes,
Look
because you
after
can.
Absolutely.
That's right. Look after yourself and look after each other, because you matter.
Absolutely. You're so right. Bye.
Yeah. All right. Bye-bye. Thank you so much.